for this particular talk, the idea was we want to paint the picture of privacy on Polkadot today from kind of a high level, from like a look into the ecosystem overall. And I think I have two fantastic guests to do this with. We have Fabi from Parity and Dieter from Web3 Foundation. Do you both want to maybe say a word? Everyone just met me in the previous session, but maybe you want to say a quick word about what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I can go first. Can you hear me well?
We hear you good.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So I'm like an early employee at Parity. So I moved the company for like 4 to 5 years. I kind of started in the Ethereum days when we primarily built Parity Ethereum, now Open Ethereum, and then kind of like have helped build like Polkadot, kind of like from a paper to now like the actual technology and the ecosystem and all around that. And yeah, I'm still at Parity, primarily looking after the adoption efforts.
Cool. I run ecosystem development at the Web3 Foundation. I haven't been around as long as Fabi. It's very difficult to beat 5 years in the Polkadot ecosystem, but I joined a couple of years ago and did a lot of different non-crypto things prior to that. Although I did do a cryptography graduate degree at one point, which originally got me interested into the space, but then kind of went on and did a lot of other stuff before actually joining.
So I want to take us back to an event that, so I think it was December 2019, before all of the, lockdown happened. I actually helped out a Polkadot event. It was Sub-Zero 1. It was the second Sub-Zero event. And back then, I think there was only one privacy-focused talk, and it was on TEEs. And I remember learning that there was like a little burgeoning TEE ecosystem. So TEEs, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a sort of another privacy technology that relies more on the trusted execution environment of like hardware. And it's quite different from ZK. It's somehow like sometimes people in each camp might not like the other's approach, but it is a privacy tech. And I guess like the question I have is why back then were TEs exciting and what maybe has happened in terms of privacy since then?
Yeah, I mean, I can, this is my thinking back, right? So maybe other people have different answers for it. But so if you think back, so this is like the first Sub-Zero is like end of
16 months ago, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sub-Zero 1. So this was the second one.
The second one.
Yeah. I think it's like end of 2019 or something like that. So this is like this is early days for Substrate, right? So like anyone who's built on Substrate then, if they're still around, like I don't think there are that many lines of code that are still the same, right? And the underlying tech has changed a lot, and so it's not, there isn't, why we did have like these first pioneers on it. I think it was primarily people that were attracted by like cool tech, not necessarily like business opportunity, or this is also deep in the winter, right, of crypto. So it's definitely like a different crowd. But I actually think like I'd be interested if you have a different perspective on this, Dieter, but I think it's like early grants and showcases around TEs that were there. So there's like specifically, I think the project you're talking about is Substrate TE, is still around. I think it's renamed since. But that became like a showcase that other people inspired by, okay, like this is how you can use TE tech on Substrate. And then from there's a couple of projects that spun out. Part of the explanation, I think the other part of the explanation is also TEs, bringing something into production with TEs around privacy tends to be easier than doing it at the zero knowledge path, right? So, it's not too far away that, thinking that's also a reason why a lot of people maybe jumped onto that first.
So it almost sounds like for more ZK tech, and I think that has actually happened since then, but like what needed to happen were a few key projects that got some visibility, maybe, where people could like understand a use case using one of these technologies, and some of the foundational tech is built. And then that kind of can encourage more projects to jump in.
Yeah, I think so, and it's just actually it's the power of defaults, right? Like if you let's say one of the initial Substrate tutorials like mentions TEEs or is like an example of like how you can use TEE, then a whole class of Substrate developers, like that's what they're seeing at initially, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly things like that went on. It's like when you look into this Polkadot ecosystem, oh, there's a lot of TE stuff. So maybe go down that route to explore stuff. But there wasn't anything in the tech really that would have dictated that.
Yeah. I want to look a little bit over the last 3 months, because I mean, just recently I had you, Fabi, on the show, and we talked a little bit about like this booming ecosystem. I want to talk maybe generally about like the number of projects overall to try to understand like how ZK, because I know there's a bunch of new ZK focused or privacy projects, but I want to sort of understand first this larger picture. Dieter, maybe you want to say a few words on that.
Yeah, of course. I think in the last 3 months, I mean, what we've seen is the number of projects has obviously gone up, and it really just keeps going up. If you look at where we stand now in terms of projects building on Polkadot, there's over 400 projects building on the tech stack in some way. I mean, this doesn't just count parachain projects, but also basically anything within what we call the Polkadot tech stack, which includes Polkadot, includes parachains, but also includes like all the pieces of infrastructure to really enable application development in a decentralized and positive and really rewarding way. So about 130, 140 of these projects are building substrate-based chains, which we hope end up being parachains, and I think probably the majority of them will. So that's like at a high level what the state of like people building on, what projects building on Polkadot looks like. In the last 3 months, like we don't do a very good job of tracking this change, but there is like one good, very simple to do. We just have to kind of do it. But there's what we do track though are applications to the Substrate Builders program, which I think give a good proxy for how this has increased in the last 3 months or so. And so there's been a total of, and for those of you who don't know, the Substrate Builders program is basically, it's like an evergreen accelerator in a way, where that's hosted by Parity and really tries to give a high amount of support from like the technical BD side and other areas to say the top 30% of teams building in the Polkadot ecosystem. And we've seen 60 applications to this program in the last 3 months or so, for a total of I think like 250 or 260 applications also since the second Sub-Zero when the program was launched. So that's kind of a nice number for how the ecosystem's been growing.
What is the focus of many of these projects? I'm kind of trying to get a picture of like, what is the most popular topics that people are applying on like for?
Yeah,
I kind of imagine privacy might not be in that top ranking, but I want to kind of understand what is there, because maybe there's a way for more privacy to be incorporated.
Totally. I mean, I think to nobody's surprise, when you actually break down that number, the biggest category is DeFi. But to me, it's actually like not quite as big as you would think, at least when you're comparing it to other base layer ecosystems, basically. So I think like if you look at the Substrate Builders program, which has like roughly 60 parachain and application teams on it, about a third of them are DeFi. And then there's really not like a massive other category, but there's probably like this tail of mid-size and smaller categories as well. And I think like the next runner-ups you see are identity, gaming and NFT platforms, which has become super, super popular in the last little while. Yeah. But then also privacy is probably like third or fourth. Oh, cool. I mean, it's also tricky. It's also tricky too, right? Because privacy sometimes goes hand in hand with other areas, right? It's not just privacy as a service, but it can be like DeFi focused privacy preserving application.
Yeah. Or even like you can include maybe one small part as private, but it wouldn't even be on the marketing pitch. You also have sometimes ZKPs used for all sorts of other reasons, like compression, or Filecoin, it turns out, like uses tons of snarks, but it's not a privacy project necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. So when I say privacy, like it's a bit of a judgment call sometimes where we actually categorize these projects.
Got it. Do you think, do you think that there's some challenges when it comes to privacy and Polkadot? Like we just talked about one thing about how maybe there weren't early example projects other than TE projects. So that's, I mean, in a way, what we're seeing is like having those front and center maybe would help to push it. So that would be like maybe a social or business side. But are there any challenges to getting more privacy on the actual network, even maybe on a technical front?
So I would say, I mean, there aren't any like inherent technical limitations to privacy on Polkadot or Substrate, that would go beyond the technical limitations. The biggest technical limitation of privacy on Polkadot is it's a public blockchain, right? So like stuff needs to be publicly verified and things like that. But that's not unique to Polkadot. I'd say if anything, Substrate gives a very high degree of technical freedom generally in blockchain development. It allow for use cases that are much more difficult to do on something like Ethereum or really any other like more static, more homogeneous kind of blockchain system. The biggest limitation to zero knowledge applications, specifically on Polkadot, aren't technical. They come from the primary use cases of ZK technology, which are scaling and privacy, right? So like if you take the scaling use case, scaling isn't a pressing issue in Polkadot yet, right? Like it's inherent out there. Parachains aren't live yet. There's not like, it's not like you could say there's too much going on. There's currently really nothing going on. So it's not like people jump in and build ZK rollups all the time, right? Because it's not yet a pressing issue. So that's one part of the equation. And then the other part is, if you think about the privacy aspect of it, right? Like, unfortunately, if you think about like human innovation and progress, I think privacy often takes a backseat, right? So you see that generally in how we develop web applications, it's more about convenience and use cases and so on than about user privacy, at least at the beginning. And then it takes a while till people understand it. And we see the same thing in Polkadot. Like the first thing, if there's nothing, isn't privacy that people are jumping on. It's let's build stable coins, let's get some users in here, and then we can think about the privacy of these users after that. So it's also part of it is also just maturity of the project, which slowly these kind of themes are catching up.
First of all, I want to say to everyone who's listening, feel free to also add your own thoughts on anything we're talking about in the chat, because I'd also be curious to hear from the builders' perspective, if they see any challenges. One of the thoughts I had here is like, generally the palettes, like the ZK focused palettes, like currently, as I understand it, they're mostly coming from the community. So like it is community built. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but like, is there a way that this is being decided on or encouraged?
No.
Peter has.
If you want to
go. Not from I think like the parity or Web3 side in terms of product, right? Like, I mean, one thing about what we try to do is we try to make a very low friction, high quality environment for application and parachain development, and we don't really take an opinionated view as to we want team X to do this, or I mean, and to varying extents this is true. Like there are certain things that obviously we really want on Polkadot. But I think all the development in the privacy sphere, like it's not like somebody's kind of there behind the scenes saying we want a lot of these palettes being developed.
Okay.
So I think when you look at these palettes, they're developed by projects who have a specific product in mind. That being said, and I think I saw Al in the audience, so I would love for him to weigh in on this. I do think there's, within Web3 research, there is a strong desire for, having good, like privacy primitives on Polkadot and on Substrate so that really interesting products can be developed that incorporate good privacy features. But that's not like that's far from an active product approach from our end.
I kind of wonder, like, how would one push for that? Like, given our role as the zero knowledge validator, like what can we kind of do to encourage more of that? Is it sort of an education question? Because one point I want to make is privacy as an afterthought is very common. We hear that all the time. But adding privacy on non-private systems is also kind of a dumb approach to privacy, because you've lost your privacy. So pulling it back is a lot harder than having it from the start. So yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, like, what could we do also as a community maybe to push for more of this?
I think it would be really like something that I've never felt quite comfortable with is like, where does the demand exist for privacy? Like, we all say we want privacy. There's a lot of like interesting general privacy as a service frameworks. But like, where are users actually willing to pay for privacy right now? And where are users actually willing to trade off usability for privacy? Like, these are questions that I really struggle with. And like, to what degree is that trade-off actually valid, right? And so it's not easy to answer those questions, but I think if the community or if someone in the community can get like a really good idea of how that looks, then there can be products out there that really do a lot better things and fill a niche.
Cool. And we do actually later today have this session, which is like privacy and business and DeFi, and like how maybe you can make a business doing or like including privacy. So yeah, do check that out later if people want to join in on that conversation. I have kind of like a last category or topic that I want to touch on here, which is about like the current state of this bull market and funding. And there is a lot of opportunities for funding. So I'm kind of like, what should teams know? And what should they know from both of you about like what's out there? If you have an idea, you have a project, what kind of support is there?
I think just generally, go ahead, Fabi.
Yeah, I also wanted to make a very general point. I think my very general point is, like, if money is not the problem, right? If money is not the bottleneck anymore, the thing that becomes the bottleneck is talent. So whatever you can do to get talent into the Polkadot ecosystem, and I mean that in the broadest sense, right? It could be from like researchers to engineers to like product people, from like founders to interns. Like, it really doesn't matter. Like, there's enough ideas and opportunity in the Polkadot ecosystem, and there's enough funding, right? So like, what's the next thing really is smart people who are willing to do it, right? I mean, you did the ZK jobs fair, Anna, right? Which I think, like, thinking about like initiatives that really help, right? I think that's what really helps, right? Is getting smart people interested in it and showing them that path that exists. That's actually, relatively low friction currently, considering to other times, past times in the blockchain space when you wanted to start something or get hired somewhere.
It's true. It sounds like, money is not the bottleneck, but there aren't enough people doing it. Are there projects that, like, I don't know, Web3 Foundation or Parity work on to encourage more builders in general that we should know about?
Yeah, I think the grants program is kind of one of the quintessential programs here that's been around for quite a long time. I mean, over 2 years now, which basically funds like specific open source software development. And I know like several of the teams that are presenting today have hopefully had good experiences around that program. I mean, that certainly gives like some money to get started, but then there's also more holistic programs like the Substrate Builders program, which I alluded to earlier, which is basically much more focused on giving like tailored, structured support to teams, not just funding specific deliverables, but taking them from like a piece of tech to a sustainable business that's solving problems and adding value. These are two examples. I mean, the whole ecosystem and business development team is really just focused
working on that.
So there's a lot of different stuff.
I wonder, like, going even to that earlier phase. And so we'll mention this, like, we have a plan to do a ZK focused hackathon. I think it's now time. There's enough tools, there's enough projects that it's going to be like possible. I wanted to do it years ago, but I wasn't able to. But I'm wondering, like, from the actually Polkadot community itself, like, are there ways for people to dive in to even this kind of thing? Or do you feel like the palettes need to come first? Does the tech need to like reach a point before people can actually start building this kind of on their own, before they have funding, before they have a team, before they're like eligible really for the builders program? Is there any ideas around that?
I mean, you know, I'll say this, like, I think as an individual developer, like, there's certainly ways to get into it, right? Like, even something like grants, you can, I mean, there's a lot of individual developers that build small components and get some money for it, or same on the treasury or with bounties on Polkadot. So there are even programs for that, I would say, right, that support that. If you think about, like, let's say building a privacy focused parachain, you will need some funding and a team. Right, yes. Like, it's very unlikely that you as a one man, you know, will build something that if you build on that level and in the tech stack. I still think like the best way to get into it, because it is, you know, there's a lot of different teams building on it, and there isn't necessarily like the CK hub for Polkadot where like all the news are on and then all the tech is or whatever. It's like, either talk to anyone at Parity Web3, like Dieter or me, or talk to the teams that are building, right? Like all the lightning talks that come after this talk and all the people who are actually doing it, they know the other parties that play this game in the Polkadot. Probably still the best source if you want to get like really up to date what's happening in the ecosystem. Talk to people who are in it, because the CK ecosystem in Polkadot, it's not massive, right? You can easily just get to know the people. Yeah. And understand what's up.
Do you think most builders need to have like firm substrate skills plus ZK skills in order to actually do this stuff? Or are there actually opportunities now, and maybe it's with like future parachains, where they can use maybe existing cryptographic libraries or even existing open source tech products and start to like play with them in a Polkadot context?
Yeah, so with substrate, I'd say there's like a few skill sets that come together, right? Like, one is certainly if you know Rust, that helps, and certainly if you know blockchains, that helps, right? So but even just the expectation of like, hey, we're just looking for people who know both is obviously not what we're doing, right? Like, we're very much you know, looking at this in terms of like, great if you know one of them, and we teach you the other one, or, you know, maybe you don't know anything and you just jump into it. That's also cool. Layers you can build and becoming varying degrees of complexity and so on. I think the tricky part with the especially the zero knowledge stuff is there's a lot of like then specific knowledge that goes into it as well, right? If you're like an applied cryptographer who also knows some Rust, amazing, right? But like, how many people are out there that have that? So I would never like rule it out independently from what your skill set is. It just depends on what kind of learning curve you're launching yourself into.
Yeah, although as Al just pointed out in the chat, in an earlier event we actually did with the Cosmos community, the fact is the findings over there was that a lot of the cryptographic and ZK libraries are actually built in Rust. And that's why I think there's a great connection point that could be made between these groups. And I'm trying to figure out if there's other things that are blocking more folks from the ZK community from actually experimenting in the Polkadot ecosystem. And that's where I'm wondering if it's because of the substrate build, the fact that you have to kind of learn that infrastructure. But maybe that's just like currently, and once a certain development threshold is reached, it won't be that complicated to just like get into it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so like substrate has a learning curve, right? I think as everything has, and like as I alluded to earlier, right? Like, there's a big design principle is technical freedom, which comes usually with complexity, right? So that certainly exists. But if you think about, you know, if you think about that comparing to like, you know, trying to build zero knowledge stuff on Ethereum, down the line, it probably saves you time, right? Because it is something where you can go much deeper in the stack and actually build something from the ground up designed and optimized for your ZK use case, whereas you don't have to hack around, metering and whatnot in Ethereum. That was never part of the design of Ethereum, if you want. So.
And there's a question in here, and maybe we've already kind of answered this, but I think it's worth revisiting, which is, where can someone actually find the developers building or wanting to build in Substrate, Polkadot, and let's narrow that even further, in a privacy way? Where do people start that process of finding their teammates and finding their co-builders?
Yeah, so I mean, there's I think there's many ways, but start it. As I said, talk to people, check out documentation and tutorials, talk to teams that are already building, check out the grant stuff, check out the treasury stuff, check out the hackathons. I think if you're specifically to your question, right, wanting to find builders or co-founders or whatever, hackathons is definitely a good place. We're running a ton of incubators, accelerators. So that's a great place to check out. As you said earlier, builders program, even if you don't get in, right, to get the feedback of hey, where I'm at with my project, a few months here and there of work, and then I can get in. So even just for that feedback experience, I think that's worth checking out. Yeah, and then there is a page. I don't think it has a privacy tab, but we have a page on substrate.io, which is essentially Substrate users. I think substrate.io, something like that. Where you see all the projects building in the Substrate ecosystem, and you can, those are wallets or those are DeFi projects and so on. I'm not sure if there's also a privacy tab. If not, we should probably add one. But you can essentially just find all the kinds of links and little descriptions and so on what are these people doing, right? So it's a good place to start poking around.
In general, just so you know, part of our purpose in coming here and doing this event with everyone is also to understand all of those things, those places that maybe we didn't find on our first exploration of the space, places where people find their partners, the hackathons, and try to encourage, in the hackathon, maybe a privacy track, or we help to put together, we'll try to find a privacy-focused project that can sponsor one of those tracks or something like this. Cool. Well, I think we're at time, but I want to say a big thank you to both of you for giving us this high-level view and starting to give us a sense for where the space is at today, but also where it could be and maybe some of the channels we can use to push it in the direction that we'd like to see it.
Thanks so much, Anna.
For sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anna.
Cool.